Welcome to WDEX, my show, Wired Differently Experience. I'm so excited to share these things with you guys every week. I think about it and I store it up and I'm moving and ruminating around. And I just got to tell you that it's really my calling. It's my job. I literally think about my job often. I have so many different jobs, if you will. But when it comes to the show, my job is to inspire you. My job is to motivate you. My job is to love you. I mean, my job is literally to remind you about the little things in life, to take inventory and to do the things and to basically learn from some of the things that I can share that I've basically done myself. I mean, we've talked about this past and time over again, and these topics come up to me resoundingly through my prayers or through sleep or through no sleep or whatever it is. And this is just a wonderful vehicle to share some things with you. So this week's topic is Mr. Principal. I'll take the one with the holes in it. Mr. Principal, give me the one with the holes in it. 3 principles to a principle. 3 principles to a principle to be principled. 3 principles to a principle. Think about that. I want you to understand what we're trying to talk about here. So the little scroller, the ticker I got going on the bottom is a fun one. I just want to remind everybody that my brand has never made me a penny, but I think about things sometimes and what has helped me. What has helped me become successful? My principles have made me successful. And they've always haven't been good principles all along, but I thought I'd take you back to my school days. I thought I'd take you back to the 3 principles that I was principled basically by a principal. Does that make sense? So if you have this idea here, what's going on, I've got a cocktail of a message for you today. I mean, it's like, it's shaken, not stirred. So my life has been shaken, not stirred so much. I think you can understand what I'm talking to you about there. Our lives have been shaken, not stirred. But this cocktail of a message is going to blend the 3 principles, the principle in my school, the principles that I'm learned, the 3 I'm going to teach you from, and then the principle of all of these principles are going to come down to one common denominator. So I thought I would just start off with some fun stories. So the first time I was really principled by a principal was my teacher in 2nd grade. Now, I don't know if this woman's alive anymore, but if my brother's watching this, he's probably going to go off on me right now, because when I start to tell this story, I've been telling it for like 50 years in my life, and it was one of the first principles I've ever really managed. And my teacher, her name was Mrs. Weisenfelder. Mrs. Weisenfelder was her name, and I've never spoke to her since 2nd grade, and I don't know that I really care to. Maybe she's still around, maybe she's not, but she did give me a principle. And I got to tell the story because it's not really a funny story. It's just this idea of the first principle. Don't cross the line. I want you to think about this. Don't cross the line. I mean, we all have what we call, Mr. Obama talked about the red line, and Mr. Trump talked about lines, and your coaches talked about lines, and your teachers talked about lines. But I think one of the first principles I ever learned in my life was don't cross the damn line, Todd. Well, you can imagine that I probably wasn't the perfect young child all the time. But in this particular case, the teacher was out at recess, you see. And we knew that there was a patch of grass that just was having trouble growing up. And every recess, the kids would cut the corner and they would just trample on that grass. And everybody knew that that was a bad thing because the teacher didn't want you to cross that dang line. Don't cross that line. The proverbial line. Well, sure enough, that afternoon, I came out just a little bit late. I knew not to cross that line, but I came flying out that door, and I just really didn't have much regard to that line. I didn't really have much regard for the area. I just wanted to get to the schoolyard, and I came across that line. I cut the corner, stomped on all that damn grass, and all the whistles went off. The cheers went off. Everybody went crazy because the teacher said the next kid that crossed that line was going to get a whooping. It's my first lesson in life, I think, because I really didn't remember everything, but I knew I shouldn't have. But I was in a hurry, and I just wanted to take off and get across that schoolyard. I crossed the line, and after recess, we went inside. All the kids gathered around, and I'm not going to tell you this woman did everything right, but I'm going to tell you I had a whooping coming. She took me outside the room after she told everybody, the whole class, that I told you kids The next kid that crossed that line is going to get a whooping. And little Todd here went across that line. I was shaking a little bit. She said, now we have to go out in the hallway, and he's going to get a whooping. So I don't know why she left all those kids alone in that room. I'm sure they were stirring and shaking a little bit, not stirred. Went out in the hallway, and I got a smack. 2 smacks with her hand. Whap, whap. Went back into the room, and you know what? I never crossed that line again. I never crossed that line again. And to this day, I think about the lines that can be crossed, the lines that are there to be crossed. And I have carried that message of Mrs. Weisenfelter with me. First principle 1, don't cross the line. Think about the ramifications of the lines. Think about the lines. Now, it's nice to know that I didn't kill anybody when I crossed the grass line. But that's a principle, right? And I think back, and the second principle I learned by getting a whooping was not to be disruptive. Don't be so disruptive, Todd. It was in 4th grade, I think. I was in 4th grade, 3rd or 4th grade. And the principal that time was actually the principal, Mr. Reemsnyder. Mr. Reemsnyder in Lincoln Elementary High in Hudson, Michigan. And clearly corporal punishment was the way of business back in 1968 or whatever the hell year that was. And we didn't think twice about it. But I was told not to be so disruptive in class. I was told not to be so disruptive in the cafeteria, you see, because the cafeteria brought on lots of, it wasn't like jail or anything, but it brought on lots of energy and people were all kind of showing off. And as you can imagine, I was wired differently back then, right? But I was being disruptive. And Mr. Reemsnyder said, Mr. Saylor, I'm going to tell you right now, do not be so disruptive. You're causing problems with other people, other students, other children. Yes, sir, Mr. Reemsnyder. And I didn't give it much thought. About 5-10 minutes later, the classes were moving around in the cafeteria. And I went over into the corner because I just watched the TV show Happy Days that previous Tuesday night. And Potsy was carrying on with the Fonz and who else was on that? Richie and the whole gang were there. And Potsy was making a little joke. You see, he was making a little joke when he was trying to make out with a girl in one of the scenes on Tuesday night, I think 7 o'clock on Happy Days, the best show ever, right? And what Potsy did was, though, he became disruptive, and he went over into the corner and he started to pretend like he was making out with a girl, but he really had his arms behind his back, and he kind of made it look like he was in the corner with a girl when he really wasn't. Well, I thought that was pretty clever. And I just forgot the whole lesson, or by the principal, Mr. Reemsnyder, to literally not be disruptive by calling and cackling and talking and making a scene. And so I went over into the corner and I did this. I don't know if you could tell me in practice, but I got my arms behind me and I was in the corner and I was just doing this in the corner, I was being disruptive. I was being generally disruptive. So I literally became disruptive. He came over. He said, Mr. Saylor, you got to come to my office. I went to his office, and he said, Mr. Saylor, you were disruptive. Principle number 2, you were disruptive. You're going to have to take a spanking. Yes, sir. And he whipped me over out by the hallway and never had any worried about having any chaperones in that regard. And he cracked me 2 times with his hand. Matter of fact, that's a lie. He cracked me 2 times with a board. 2 times with a board. After Mrs. Weisenfelder cracked me, after the first time with her hands for 2 times for crossing the line, she said, have you learned your lesson, Mr. Saylor? And I said, yes, sir, I have. And she says, make sure you tell your father. And it's oddly enough, I went down to the office of Mr. Reemsnyder, the principal, after making out like Potsy, and I got cracked with the board 2 times on behind. And he said, have you learned your lesson, Mr. Saylor? I said, yes, sir, not to be disruptive. He says, now make sure you go tell your father. And I want to tell you the third story, the third principle that I learned. The third principle is this: own it. Todd, you're going to get a whooping. You're going to have to pay penance. You're going to have to pay for what you've done. You crossed the line and you've been disruptive. Two very important principles I learned. I got a way where I'm going with all this, so hang on there with me because I'm just getting warmed up. I get excited. I get fired up, and I've got a great message I want to share with you. But the third time I went to my school. It was in 6th grade. I'm going to show you a picture of me in 6th grade playing football. But right now, I was in 6th grade, and I was jelling around in the room, and we were having a good time, and there I was. The teacher, I can't remember his name, came into the room, and there was a nice young lady. I don't know why I picked on her, but she was sitting there harmless, doing nobody any problems. And as I came into the room after recess, she sat there, and they were all sitting in their chairs, and I walked behind her to get to my chair, and she had this really long ponytail. I mean, it was like a 5-foot long ponytail. I never seen a horsetail that long in my life. And all I did was come behind her, and I grabbed that horsetail or that ponytail. She didn't have a ponytail. She had a horsetail. This thing was like 4 feet long. Never seen anything like it. I was amused. I was distracted. And I grabbed that ponytail, and I cracked it like a ponytail, and I pretended like maybe I was riding a horse. Now I know it's wrong. I'm even a little embarrassed about it now to this day. I'm 55 years old, and I did that in 6th grade. But let's call him Mr. Tinsworth. And Mr. Tinsworth, he says to me, Mr. Saylor, you know that was wrong, and that's disruptive. You've crossed the line. You've done everything wrong. Sit down in your seat, and after school, you're going to go see the principal. Principal number 3, Principal Weisenfeller, Principal Reamsnyder, now Principal Jack Zimmerman. This guy was a badass, right? So I knew I had crossed the line. I knew that I was disruptive. And I got a point to this. Now I knew I was in a class. I had learned my first 2 principles. I'd learned my lessons, right? But guess what? I couldn't stand it. I just couldn't bear the idea of another cracking. I just couldn't bear the idea of waiting around till the end of school to get my ass whooping because I knew it was coming. I knew that I deserved it. I had crossed the line. I'd been disruptive, and now I had to own it. You ever been there? As adults, we do the same stuff. Don't even be asking yourself, why is he talking? Why is he preaching? I mean, just don't run from it. But here's what I did in 6th grade. Let me just turn the volume up a little bit. I raised my hand not even 60 seconds later. I said, Mr. Tinsworth, I apologize for what I've done. I really have to go to the bathroom. Would you please let me go to the bathroom? He says, Mr. Saylor, your apology is accepted, I'm sure, but you'll still see the principal at the end of the day. I said, Mr. Tinsworth, I understand. I just need to go to the bathroom. Mr. Saylor, you are excused. Go to the bathroom and come directly back to this room. I got out of that room so fast. I jumped up. I got around that girl. I said sorry. I whispered something. I went by her, went out the door, and I went right down the hallway. And on my way to the bathroom, there was the principal's office. I never made it to the bathroom. I walked right into that office. I went right by the secretary. I said, is Mr. Jack Zimmerman, Principal Zimmerman there? And she said, yes, he's in his office right now. I said, great. Please, can I see Mr. Principal Jack Zimmerman? She said, sure, let me ask him if he's available. She walked in. She says, Mr. Zimmerman, Mr. Saylor is out here. He'd like to see you. Todd Saylor? I could hear him in the background. Well, let him in right now. Let that young man in here right now. And she opened the door, and I walked in there, and my heart was beating 100 miles an hour. Mr. Zimmerman, I got to tell you, I did some things. I crossed the line. I was disruptive. I really need to own it. I've apologized, and I really need to get my whooping right now. I'd really like to take my whooping right now. Todd, I understand. What did you do? Well, I grabbed the girl's ponytail. I did this. I did that. I was wrong. Mr. Tinsworth said I needed to come down here and see you and that I would take my punishment. He said, yes, sir. We'll just take care of that right now. And I said, Mr. Zimmerman, I see 2 boards up on the wall. In 4th grade, I had a board, but I never saw a board with holes in it. He said, well, Mr. Saylor, those are 2 boards of your choice. I said, why is the one with holes in it and one not? Tell me about the one with the holes in it. He says, well, that board hurts the most. I'll take the ones with the holes in it. Get her done right now. He bent me over. He gave me 2 cracks with the board with the holes in it. I don't know which one hurt more, the ones with no holes or the ones with holes. But the point of the matter is I owned it. We own it. Crazy little story, right? But those are 3 principles. You cross the line, you're disruptive. You cross the line to be disruptive again, and you know what's coming. We make choices, you see. We get older and we learn these principles. Sometimes it's okay to cross the line because the cause seems to be greater than the harm it will cause you. Sometimes it's okay to be disruptive because we're trying to make a point. We're trying to share a point. We're trying to create something that's bigger than what was there before. I get all that. But there's still lines that are crossed. There's still people that are crossed. There's still people that are hurt. There's still people that become disruptive. The line has 2 sides to it, right? But the point of what I've got to say is the 3rd principle I saw gave me the same whooping, but I owned it. I knew what was before me, and that's why I took it the way I did it. The first 2, I was learning. The 3rd one, I was repenting. I was asking for forgiveness. I was dealing with what I did wrong. Now, the message isn't here is a right, a left, a wrong, a top or bottom or anything of that nature. The point of the matter is that I learned 3 lessons. The point of the matter is every time, including the last time I got my whooping by Mr. Zimmerman, he got done whacking me. He said, do you understand what you did wrong? I said, yes, sir, I did. He says, go tell your father. Go tell your father. Why is Miss Weisenfelder cracking me in the ass with her hand in 2nd grade and telling me to tell my father? Which I did. And why is Mr. Reemsnyder cracking me in the ass with a board with no holes in it and asking me if I was sorry and telling me to go tell my father? And furthermore, why in the 6th grade, after I go all the way down, sneak out of class, lie to my teacher, I never even took a whiz. I went right to the principal. Probably should have went, but I didn't. Went all the way back to my room, felt better, finished the day, and after he gets done giving me a whack with the board with the Swiss damn cheese hole in it, go tell your father. These are the things that get me riled up sometimes. Because here's it is. I'm here to inspire you. I'm here to motivate you. I'm here to love you, right? I'm here to remind you that these principles are out there. There's things swallowing around in my mind. And, I just want to share them with you. You got the right to turn me off. Heck, I got viewers out here. No one's shutting me off. So I must be annoying you enough to keep it on, or I'm telling you something or entertaining you or giving you some excitement or some principles, because I hope it's getting through to your head that my brand has never made me a penny, but my principles have made me successful. And if you want to be successful in life, we have to know what we want in life. And to become successful, you have to know how to get it. And you need to learn principles. Now, just forget for a moment that you don't care about crossing the line principle. Let's just forget for a moment that you don't care about being disruptive principle, because those are big principles. We all know it. And let's just care for a minute that you understand that you shouldn't be grabbing a girl's ponytail and pretending like she's a carnival ride, right? So you shouldn't be doing those things, right? But let's forget not that we do need principles in our life. You can't have a principleless life. It won't work. Principles make the world go round. The good ones work, the bad ones kill you. 3 principles that principled me to a principle. Those were examples of the principles. You have to have principles. Your parents help you with principles. Your teachers help you with principles. Your principles help you with principles. And a smack in the ass isn't a bad thing. I'm 55 years old telling you a story about what happened to me because I failed to understand the principle crossing a line in second grade. I failed to follow the instructions of don't be disruptive like Potsy on Happy Days. And I got carried away and grabbed the ponytail and embarrassed a young lady. But I did learn to own it. And to tell my Father. So what's really the principle of the principles that I just shared with you? So my question is, what's the first principle you remember learning? Can you? And more importantly, have you even thought about, have you went in the way back machine? Have you ever just rewinded? I mean, for some reason, I think of my good friend Phil Carroll. I think of a guy by the name of Travis Walls. I think of a guy by the name of Dave Pitek. I think of a guy by the name of John Lindsay, Bruce Knox. I think of these guys like Phil Rowe. I think of these guys back in the way back machine where I was growing up and I did some things wrong and I got my butt kicked and I learned some things and I learned not to do this, but I learned to never let them do that again. You know, I just go back in the way back machine. When is the last time you went back in the way back machine and just turned up the inventory and thought about your principles? Do you have any principles, guidelines, or rules? Are you kind of wallowing around in your self-pity sometimes and wondering why things aren't kind of kicking up for you and the COVID schmove and all that? And I'm not trying to place blame. I'm just trying to surface some things here. I'm just trying to understand some things here because I know that that's what happens to me. I forget my principles. When I get depressed, when I get down, when I get out, when I feel like nobody loves me, when I feel like it's not going away, why? I forgot my principles. And I can go back and get them. Now, we don't have time for all my principles. But the point is, if you don't have principles, where are you going to get them? If you're in business, you have to have principles to do business. If you're in a relationship, you have to have some rules of the marriage, right? Or your girlfriend or your man friend, or I get fired up because I start these things and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be stupid. They're not going to get me. And I'm going to go on some tirade and I'm going to embarrass myself. And I'm going to have my kids come tell me, why did you carry on like that? And I'm going to say, well, I want you to understand, Kara. I want you to understand, Kendra. I want you to understand, Courtney. Without principles, you will flounder your entire life. You will become average or less than average. Principles. God gave me 3 principles to give me 1 principle by 3 ass whoopings. But the whole principle of the principles that the principles gave me was the fact that I needed principles. Principles. You got to own it. So let me ask you again. What's the first principle you remember learning? I want you to go in that way back machine. I got thoughts going in my head right now, hanging out with Phil Rowe on a golf course where I just didn't act correctly. I got things where I was hanging out with my buddy Dave Pitek and I was out not acting correctly and I got squared up real good. I got out there. I remember playing basketball. I remember playing football. I remember playing in the backyard. I remember playing with a boy that was a little bit bigger than me that I learned a real good principle, right? I learned some things. Man. But the problem is you all learned some things too. And I'm guessing that you're not remembering those things that you learned because when we get older, and watch this, because I'm going to close out with this. I want you to think back to your first principle, right? You got your first principle. And the next thing I want you to understand about is take that first principle and have you applied it? What have you learned? I literally, I can't, I can't cross a patch of grass without getting this shit. And oh man, I'm not going to be disruptive in a cafeteria ever again, like making out with myself like Potsy on Happy Day. I'm just never going to, I don't want that ass cracking. There's no way I'm going to have that happen. And I'm going to stay clear of embarrassing any young lady, person, old person, any person. I'm not going to cross that line. I'm not going to be disruptive. I'm not going to embarrass. And if I do at the age of 55, do anything like that, I get outline of my principles. The unfortunate thing is I don't have a principal to go reprimand me. I don't have a teacher or a parent that's gonna line me up and give me the board with the holes in it. And I did learn that lesson. Take the board with the holes in it. Learn yourself, Todd. So the point of this principle is, if you can remember, after I got the principles whooping, after I got the lesson learned, after I went down, I crossed the line, I was disruptive, and then I learned to own the embarrassment and shame I caused a young lady in a classroom in 6th grade. After each whooping, each teacher told me, now go tell your father. I just crossed the line of grass. Go tell your father. I was just messing around in the corner of a cafeteria with like Potsy and kissing and making out with myself in the corner. Now go tell your father. I just got carried away a little bit and I grabbed the ponytail and I was shaking it a little bit. Now go tell your father. So I'm just going to wrap this up. And I'm going to give you the principle of all principles. I'm going to give you the principle that helps you understand, 1, you have to have principles. 2, you have to do inventory on your principles, because you will not be successful without principles in your life. Write them down. Sketch them in the back of your skull and your subconscious. Reprimand yourself when you cross those lines and you become disruptive, you do things you shouldn't do. Because we have to go to somebody at the age of 55. Go to your father. Just go right to your father. You don't have to get the ass whooping. Matter of fact, you can stay clear of that board with the holes in it. Just go to your father. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. There's some things I've done in my 40s, and I wanted to talk to my dad, and I go to my dad, I talk to him, and he'd give me some advice, and you know what? His advice wasn't always that good. But I did go to my dad. But I will tell you that from the time I was 30 years old, and when I did give my life to Jesus Christ, our Savior, I learned to go to my father. But when you tell your father, let me explain this to you. But when you tell your father, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your father who is unseen. Then your father who sees what is done in secret will reward you, right? Now, listen, my messages are always going to be about motivation, inspiration, all these kinds. And I'm telling you that in business and in life and in marriage and in relationships and in raising children, and I mean, what else is there? Work, entrepreneurial, business, relationships. I mean, there's nothing else out there. I'm just trying to tell you that you're going to have principles to get through all those things. And I'm just trying to tell you, one of them might be not to cross the line. Another one might not to be disruptive. Another one might not to be embarrassing young people in your class, and to go get your whooping. And once in a while, you need to just say, I'll take the board with the holes in it. But when we get to be 50 plus years old or 30 plus years old, there's nobody telling us what board we're going to get or not going to get. We don't even get the option. We need to go to our Father. So this little lesson here, as I'm going to wrap up, I really want you to begin to understand the 3 principles that I've shared with you. But those 3 principles are not the most important thing. It's the fact that you need principles. It's the fact that you have to realize that my brand, your brand, will never make you a penny, but your principles will make you successful. Your brand, we talked about your brand last week. That brand you're working on is a good thing, but it's never going to make you money. It's never going to make you successful the way you need to be successful. You need principles to make you successful. So let's wrap this up. Let's understand what Matthew 6:6 says and how that we are to do inventory on those things, how we're to bring them up to life. And every now and then, hey, you know what? Just remember to own it. Remember that you are the boss of your own whooping. You are the guy that has to get out of the middle of the 6th grade class, and you have to go right down to the principal's office, and you need to talk to him, and you need to say, hey, this is what I did wrong, Father. This is what you need to understand. And everything's going to work itself out. And put that in your inventory, put that in your quiver, and just take that lesson we had today. So, hey, listen, this is Wired Differently, WDEX, the Wired Differently experience. And I just want to remind you, my job is to inspire you. My job is to motivate you. My job is to love you. And we're going to develop these shows. We're going to keep getting better. Now, remember, also, I want you to go to my YouTube, Todd Saylor, Wired Differently. If you get an opportunity, these shows are archived there, and subscribe, and they'll come out, and they'll be right on your phone or your device or whatever you're using all the time when they come out. So that'll be where, and there's hundreds of teaching videos on Todd Saylor Wired Differently as we grow through this Wired Differently world together, because, you know, we are wired differently. I know this afternoon resonated with you, and I know there's a few points that you can get from it. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you. And I just love being wired differently, and I love you guys accepting me, and let's just keep getting better. So, hey, let's do this thing called life. Let's just do this thing called life wired differently. Remember that. I'll talk to you soon. Until next week, let's do this thing.